Hello again, and sadly for the last time in this series, this is Alister McGrath of Oxford University, bringing to an end this series of 18 short presentations introducing you to Christian theology. And I'm aware that this very short introduction actually has many weaknesses, mostly due to limitations on space, because there's a limit in what you can cover in the 3 R's of these presentations. For a start, I've only been able to look at a few theological topics, and there are many others that need to be covered. For example, the doctrines of grace, human nature, and Christian understandings of the place of other religions. I've also treated questions of theological method very superficially, and clearly you need a much deeper way of looking at these questions. And I think that's a point that we just have to accept. In 3 R's, there's a limit to what you can say. Another serious weakness with what I've just been doing is I've been able to provide hardly any contextualization for writers I've mentioned. For example, I've talked about Augustine and Athanasius. I've mentioned Martin Luther and John Calvin, but I haven't really introduced these or indeed any other thinkers and located them in their historical context. And that would have been really helpful, I think, to enable you to understand why these writers are so interesting and what it is that you might be able to learn from them. Or again, I've mentioned Anselm of Canterbury, but I just haven't had time to explain how the movement known as scholastic theology, which he represents very well, developed, or sketch its leading features, or explain its significance. So there are limits here, and I'm very much aware of them. What I've tried to do, however, is to provide you with a gateway, an introduction, nothing more, to a deeper exploration of the theological landscape. If you like, I've introduced it. Now I'm handing it over to you. Because these presentations really are just a kind of sketch map of this rich and fertile territory. And I've explored some of its features with you, but there's so much more that awaits your discovery. And my role in this set of 18 short presentations really has been to encourage you to take things further and to help prepare you for what I assure you will be a very interesting journey of exploration. Now, I really do hope that this series of short theological presentations will have whetted your appetite, will make you want to take your interest in theology further. So let's look at some points. One of the key points I've been making in these presentations is that it's not enough to explain what Christians believe and why they believe this. Rather, we need to look through, not simply look at Christian doctrines, and understand the difference that they make. They enable us to see ourselves and our world in a new way. And as I emphasized in the last presentation, we can see ourselves and the world in a new light and live accordingly by looking through, not simply looking at, Christian theology. And again, the point I began to make in the last presentation was that we can learn from the wisdom of those who've travelled on this road before us, because they have passed down to us their wisdom. But we need people to unpack that wisdom for us, to help us work out how to use it today, and who themselves have tried to put this into practice and can explain how they did so and the benefits that this brought them. And that's why theological education is so important. It's not just about the transfer of information. Here is what this writer thought. No. It's about the formation of wisdom through being shaped by reflective practitioners of the art of theology, like Augustine, Athanasius, Calvin, C.S. Lewis, and many, many others. Now, when I began to study theology at Oxford back in the late 1970s, my key question was this. How could I understand the ideas of theologians, for example, Anselm of Canterbury, who I've just mentioned? But today, I've changed. My question today is very different, and it's this. What can these theologians teach me about how I should live and think in a Christian way? Now, I wonder if you can see the point I'm trying to make. I want to learn from these people, not just learn about them. They are the teachers, and I am the student. I think it's important to remember that Anselm was certainly a very good theologian. He's remembered for his works of theology, but also for his prayers and meditations. He saw connections between theology and prayer and meditation. And I think that's one of the reasons why preaching is so important, because it's an attempt to connect up the core theological vision at the heart of the Christian faith with the concerns, needs, and hopes of the local community of faith. And preachers are the interpreters of this rich theological tradition who are able to make the connections, use the right language to help those who they're preaching to benefit from, to grow in their faith as a result of this theological vision I've been exploring with me. Well, where do you go from here? Well, it doesn't really matter whether you're studying theology on your own or taking a class that's led by someone else, because I think the basic principles are more or less the same. And in the remainder of this final presentation, I want to explain how you can move ahead with your own thinking and reflection. So if I may, let me begin by making some suggestions about how you might move ahead, and then explain how I might be able to help you. First of all, it is a good idea to study some textbooks. Now, I want to emphasize there are lots of good textbooks in the marketplace, and I'm sure you'll find one that works for you. But listen, if you find me an accessible and reliable guide to theology, you might like to try 2 of my textbooks. They're both widely used across the world, and they're available in many translations. So let me tell you about them and why they might be useful as you think about taking things further. Now, the first of these is a textbook called Christian Theology, an Introduction. This is a book based on lectures I gave at Oxford University in the 1980s and early 1990s. It's a genuine introduction. It assumes that you know nothing about theology, and it begins, so to speak, from ground zero. It doesn't dumb down the issues, but it tries very hard to explain them in ways that are both intelligent and accessible. It's now in its 6th edition, but we hope to launch a new edition in 2024. It's widely used in universities, colleges, and seminaries across the world. So here's how this book works. It's divided into 3 major sections. The first of these sections is called Landmarks. Again, landmarks. It deals with the historical development of Christian theology, because you really do need to know something about the debates over the sources and methods of Christian theology. In other words, where theology gets its ideas from. And that brings us to the second part of the book, which is called Sources and Methods. It really is an introduction to where theology gets its ideas from. It looks at questions like the relation of faith and reason, or the nature of revelation, how we interpret the Bible, and things like that. But the third and final section of the book is called Christian Theology. This is a very long section, and in fact most of my readers say it's the heart of the book. And I wouldn't be surprised if you find that you concentrate on this section. It consists of 10 chapters dealing with the major doctrinal themes of Christian theology. And we've looked at a lot of these very, very briefly in this series. So you'll find substantial discussion of things like the doctrine of God, the person of Jesus Christ, the nature and basis of salvation, and the doctrine of the Trinity. Now listen, this is a long book. It's 500 pages long. And the reason it's long is because it's comprehensive. Now you may say that sounds good, but it does sound too long. So you may prefer a shorter textbook. And that's why I wrote a second textbook called Theology, the Basics. This is much shorter, and it deals with 10 major theological themes in less detail, and it doesn't really engage questions of history or method. But it's proved very, very popular, especially for church discussion groups, and you might prefer it because it gets straight to the heart of the matter by looking at the major themes of Christian theology. Now, both of these textbooks have been around for decades, so let me tell you about a more recent short book that might be interesting and helpful. And this is my book called What is the Point of Theology? It's all about why theology matters, questions we looked at briefly in the previous presentation. And I talked to you about how theology links up with things like wisdom, well-being, and wonder. And I wrote this book very recently to mark the end of my career as a professor of theology at Oxford University in 2022. And actually, I think you might enjoy this book. It's short, and I talk to you about how you can get the most out of studying theology, the difference it makes, the use to which you can put it. It's all about using theology. It's all about growing in wisdom and well-being and experiencing wonder. And I think that's a really important theme. But there's another way in which I can help you to explore theology in more detail and depth. I'm producing lots of videos and indeed some audio material as well, all of which will be free on YouTube or other audio sharing channels. And this is there for you. It costs nothing. One of these is going to be an extended series that will be entitled Christian Reflections. And here, my approach will just be to reflect on some important themes with obvious theological aspects, like, for example, the human quest for meaning, or the beauty of the night sky, or our desire to make sense of things. And I just reflect on these with you. I'm not teaching you. I'm simply saying, let's think about these. What questions do they raise? What possible answers may it give? And these will be short reflections, and I think you'll find them helpful. I'll be using theology to make sense of things and to open up new ways of looking at ourselves and our world. And again, to emphasize, these video presentations are completely free, and you can use them and share them in any way you like. There are no copyright issues, no fees of any kind. And as I was saying, I hope to develop some podcasts for those of you who prefer simply to listen. And again, they will be posted in due course. Well, it's time to bring this series of short presentations to an end. So let me thank you for listening to me. And I hope that these will help and encourage you to study theology further. It's been a pleasure to produce this series for you, and there are more presentations on the way. But in the meantime, goodbye from Oxford, and thank you so much for listening.